Today I will be talking about the police use of force and how this may affect the confidence in the community if it is misused. I will firstly begin by outlining what force is, why it is central to policing, and how the police are held accountable for their actions through the continuum of force. I will also define routine arming and will be assessing whether arming the police is a good idea in today's society, whether it is changing the way in which the police carry out their jobs, as well as comparing routine arming in America to the UK. Throughout my vlog, I will be looking at different case studies and academic sources to try to understand how the police must be held accountable for their actions, and how if they're not held accountable, it may affect their roles within the community. The ways in which I will do this is by looking at police discretion, policing by consent, holding the police to account, and cases where the police have misused force, and how as a result may have affected the public's confidence in the community. Force is a main aspect of policing and can be quite a controversial subject, and as such is an interesting topic to look at in today's video. Force can be defined through three main pieces of information: common law, the Criminal Law Act of 1967, and the 177 Police and Criminal Evidence Act of 1984. According to common law, a person will only be justified if they have a genuine honest belief that there is an imminent danger which justifies the force being used. According to criminal law, a person may use such force as is reasonable in the circumstances of preventing a crime. And according to the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, it is the power of the constable to use reasonable force. What these definitions all have in common is that they stress that the force must be reasonable. However, where does reasonable force end and excessive and unnecessary violence begin? We can measure different levels of force on a scale called the continuum of force, with levels ranging from compliant force to deadly force, which are open to the police. The police, however, must ensure that they think about their actions, as they will have to justify which level of force they use. This is to show that the use of force they have chosen is consistent with the threat that is posed. There is a consensus among law enforcement agencies that there are 5 different levels within the continuum of force. Level 5 is deadly force, but is extremely rare to be used in the UK. It is at the top of the scale, as it is the use of firearms and strikes to the vital areas of the body. Level 4 is the use of hard techniques such as strikes and takedowns. Level 3 is the use of soft techniques such as the use of wrist locks or using handcuffs. This is the most common level of force seen if an officer is making an arrest. Level 2 is if an officer is using clear verbal commands such as put the weapon down. Sometimes this is all that is needed. And then finally, level 1. Most of the time an officer's presence is enough force. However, the police's relationship with the public may be at risk if they're not held accountable for the use of force they choose to use. The use of weapon and the manner it is used in as well is what may cause public concern. The continuum of force is linked to the idea of policing by consent. A key aspect of how policing and public safety is carried out is policing by consent. The idea of policing by consent came from Sir Robert Peel's 9 principles of policing, as the power of the police should come from the consent of the public as opposed to the power of the state. These Peelian principles were laid out in the general instructions that were issued to every police officer from 1829. If the police aim to stick to these 9 principles, then the confidence in the police will be maintained. Principles 2, 4 and 6 elaborate on the topic of force further. Principle 2, for example, the authority of armed police should not come from the fact that they are armed. It comes from the fact that the public approves of the way they conduct themselves. This is that they have confidence that they will do their job correctly and not misuse force. Principle 4 suggests that if the community are cooperating, there should be no need for physical force. And Principle 6 suggests that the consent of the public will be maintained if the police officers do their job in a proportionate fashion. This 6th principle especially urges the use of reasonable force. Police discretion can be defined as the power to make his or her choice based on a possible option of actions or inactions. Police officers implement a large amount of discretion that comes with their job as a protector of the community. This is for their safety and also for the individuals that are unable to protect themselves. If a police officer uses their powers unnecessarily, they infringe on the basic rights of the citizens upon whom they act. Officers have the flexibility to choose an appropriate response to a situation. The police must use some discretion when carrying out their job, but too much discretion can be dangerous. In the Scarman Report of 1981, it was said that discretion is at the heart of policing. It is a decision-making process as officers evaluate situations in which they intervene and choose a course of action from amongst a set of alternatives. This leads on to the question of whether it is time to routinely arm the police. Would arming the police change the way they carry out their job, and would the amount of force change? The police in the UK are mostly an unarmed police force, but officers may still have to deal with incidents where a person may be possessing a firearm or may need to respond using a firearm to a threat. In cases like these, it may be necessary to arm the police for protection of the public as well as themselves. But how can we account for the shift towards a more armed police force? For example, according to the Home Office statistics of 2016 to 2018, there was an increase in 19% in armed police operations and an increase in 3% in the number of armed police. It could be argued that if we shift more towards a more armed police force, as a community, we may lose contact we have with the police, and as such, the confidence. According to the Police Federation, the public do not want to see a more openly aggressive side to the police. However, comparing this to the police in America, probably the most notable country for their opinions on firearms and who have an armed police force, we can see that in the first 6 months of 2015, 503 people were killed by police using firearms, and in that time, American police had killed more people than the police in England and Wales had killed in 24 years. Is this due to the American culture and the fact that their police are armed? And does this prove that the level of force being used will increase if we arm the police? Are we likely to see more casualties and as such a breakdown of trust in? So what do the police think? Officers are increasingly liking the idea of routine arming, as between 2006 and 2017, there was an increase from 23% to 34% of officers wanted an armed police force. However, even 42% of officers didn't want to be armed, but still supported the idea of receiving firearm training for cases when needed. Overall, a significant proportion of officers just wanted to improve access to protection measures such as tasers and body-worn videos. There are many factors that could influence the public's perception on arming the police in England and Wales, such as psychological factors, socio-demographic factors, the issue of terrorism, and exposure to firearms. Psychological beliefs may shape a person's response, as for example, those who fear more about crime may be more open to arming the police. Socio-demographic factors may influence the public's ideas, as certain groups such as ethnic minority groups may have less trust in the police. This could be due to institutional racism that can be argued is amongst the police forces in England and Wales. If an act of terrorism occurs, this may also influence the public's perception, as it may make the public see firearms as a method of protection. And finally, exposing the public to a police force that is armed will most likely increase familiarity, and as such, the public will be less alarmed when seeing the police with firearms. However, it is not just firearms that the police are being armed with. Tasers, which were introduced in 2008, could be argued are an effective way of protecting the police and helping them to deal with situations of conflict. Are these weapons paving the way for a routinely armed police force? Which brings us back to the idea that overusing methods of force may be jeopardising the relationship the police have with the public. But what happens when the police get it wrong? When the police shot Jean-Charles de Menez, it shocked the public, as it is a level of force that we are not used to seeing the police use. When the public found out that it was a case of mistaken identity and that they had got the wrong man, it damaged the confidence in the police. Jean-Charles de Menez was a 27-year-old Brazilian man who was thought to be one of the terrorists involved in the attempted bombing incident that occurred the day before. Events that took place 2 weeks after the London bombings on the 7th of July of 2005. He was shot 11 times at point-blank range on the London Underground, and after the police had admitted that he was innocent, Operation Kratos came to the public's attention. Operation Kratos is the name for tactics that deal with anti-terrorism and confronting suicide bombers. Many argued that this method of policing was unnecessary, violent and ineffective, but how were the police held accountable after his death? The police need to be held accountable for their actions as they are a powerful organisation and use different levels of force when dealing with situations of conflict. They are an organisation that regularly come in contact with the public and as such must maintain the confidence that they have with them. The police can be held accountable through mainly two ways: the individual officers and the way that they are governed. And in the case of Jean-Charles de Menez, both of these were a problem. The individual officers who shot Menez should have been held accountable, and the Operation Kratos tactics should have been reviewed. Some of the other ways that the police can be held accountable are the law, the media, police complaints, and most importantly, the public. To conclude, police use of force can be seen as a controversial topic, and if it is misused, can affect how the public trust the police. Mistakes will still be made, however it is essential that the police are held to account for their actions in order for this confidence to be maintained. The continuum of force has also been helpful in providing guidelines for the police about the levels of force they are able to use. Regarding the question as to whether the police in England and Wales should be armed, it could be argued as to whether the level of force used by the police would increase. Currently, both the majority of the public and the police think that the police for now should not be armed, but that measures such as tasers and body-worn cameras should increasingly be used as a method of protection, and to ensure that the police discretion can be measured and the use of force they used can be justified.